Hi, my name is Bailey Watkins, and today I would like to discuss management and technology integration. I will begin by listing some of the best practices for managing technology-infused classrooms in relation to iPads, cell phones, and laptops. But first, let's check out this video that provides some great best practice examples.
I love what it's done for me for classroom management. It has changed the way that my classroom works, and there's no time wasted. It's clockwork. They move quickly and efficiently, and they're excited to get to the next group, or they're excited to get to the next activity, so they move quick, and they sit down, and they're ready. They're in it with me because they're excited, and I believe if you can get them excited about math or school in general, you've done a huge thing, more than getting them to actually learn the math. They love going in rotations because it's 20-25 minutes at each station, so it's just enough time that they can really get into it. The rotations are different, so they get to handle different kinds of topics in each one. Maybe not even topics, but just handling different devices or doing different things in each group.
One batch of health companies and have leftover power.
It allows me to work with an even smaller group, and there's usually a few kids in that small group that totally get it, so they can help the ones that don't, or I am there and I can help one at a time, one-on-one, that you don't necessarily get when you have an entire class doing the same thing. So I love the rotations, the kids do too, and they're with me the whole 90 minutes.
Now, in regards to best using and managing iPads in the classroom, it is a good idea to label them. There are a few different ways you can label the device. Label the devices by number, which will correspond with which student uses that iPad. You can also label by classroom number or teacher name. This allows everyone to know which room it belongs to in case it accidentally gets taken out of the room. You should distribute and collect iPads daily. This allows the teacher to know exactly where they are, whose hands they are in, and to make sure they are collected and stored properly at the end of each class period. I provided an example of a classroom in the bottom left picture. The desks are placed in groups, and as you can see, each group has a number, along with a storage container in the middle. This relates to labeling your iPads by number and distributing them by groups, collecting them and storing them in order to where you know exactly where they can be found the next day. Apps. I think it is a good idea to pre-download apps. This allows quicker access for the students. You have the apps that you need for your lessons, and it avoids students having to download them on their own. This can be confusing for some if they are younger, or they may download the wrong apps and not be prepared for what you had planned in your lesson. You need to train your students. This can be in relation to how to operate the device or how to handle the iPad. Students need to know how to navigate their way through the apps, the search engines, everything on there, along with handling them. They need proper care of the iPad. As you know, they're expensive, and not all schools can afford a lot of them. It is vital for students to handle them with care, place them properly, and do not be up moving around the room with them. Now let's look at some best practices for cell phones in the classroom. I think it is smart to have an entry and departure policy. This means upon arrival to class, students should have their cell phones turned off. Before exiting the classroom, the same thing applies. This allows students to have their phone placed in their backpack and to not be a distraction. When it is time to use the cell phones in the classroom and they are turned on, they should be used only for learning purposes. It's very easy for students to be off task, and while managing a class, most teachers are worried about the students being on websites or apps or texting when they shouldn't be. So it is important to monitor what they are on and to make sure they are using it for learning only. A screens down or face down policy is also good. While phones are out and turned on, if you do not want them to access them at the moment, simply say face down or screens down. This allows the phone to be on their desk in your view, but face down to where they cannot access it. This is kind of a disciplinary measure for the storage bin, but to deter students from being on their cell phone when they shouldn't be, Have it being on your desk in the front of the classroom. If you have warned students, however many times you choose, or the very first time if that's what you'd like to go with, to not be on their phone and they are on it for reasons that they shouldn't be, you can take the phone and put it in the storage bin until the end of the class. Also, keep an open mind. Be flexible with what you're doing. There are many ways to use cell phones for learning in the classroom. One way may not work and you may need to adapt and do another. Just work on it and do what's best for you. Keep an open mind. Here are some best practices for laptops and managing them in your classroom. First is policy, and this can go for a lot of your technology in your room. However, policy allows students to know exactly what's expected of them, what they're allowed to do, and what they are not allowed to do. So you should set a policy before even implementing the technology in your room. Infrastructure is also important. Technology or laptops, whichever form, will not provide any benefit to your students if your school infrastructure does not support their use. Pedagogy. Laptops are great aids in the classroom. There are many websites, apps, and educational games students can access while in your class. Choose the teaching strategy you want and best pair it with your technology. Placement is huge for laptops. You can arrange your desks to where the screens are always viewable while monitoring and walking around the room. This deters students from accessing websites they shouldn't be on and keeps them from being too curious and coming across things they should not be accessing during class. Placement can also be groups, and this ties into interaction. Laptops are a great tool for interaction due to everything you can access. The opportunities are endless. Group settings, things such as Google Classroom or Google Docs, allows for students to collaborate while learning. Now let's look at classroom technology management and lesson planning. Do you think technology can affect lesson planning? Let's look at this video to find out.
To manage a tech-infused classroom, begin with lesson planning. Plan ahead. Planning ahead allows you to be prepared and organized by having all the tools you need. Planning can relate to what technology you will use, its purpose, how you will assess students, and how you will have them grouped. It is a good idea to start small. Select a form of technology you and your students are comfortable with and progress from there. A plan B is really important. This is your backup in case technology does not work. The technology should support learning. Align with your objectives and make it engaging.
There are also some things to consider while lesson planning. We'll look at this video to find out.
There are also considerations while planning. Consider student understanding. Is the technology understandable to them? Is it helping aid the lessons? Pace is another thing to remember. Make sure students are comfortable with how quickly the technology is being integrated into their routine. Make sure you are comfortable as the instructor as well. Question: is the technology matching and helping students achieve their learning objectives? If not, maybe instructional strategies should be revised or the technology changed. This ties into being flexible. Do not be afraid to adapt when needed.
Now we'll look at some management strategies that apply to certain technology specifically. Do you think there are management strategies that apply specifically to certain technologies? There are. Laptops are the first we will discuss. While implementing technology in your classroom, if you choose to use laptops, while they're out on your students' desks being used, simply say, "Students, 45 your screen." This means students will take the top of their laptop, fold it down to 45-degree angle. This allows students to direct their attention to you and not be distracted by what is being presented on their screen. iPads, tablets, and cell phones all have strategies that apply specifically to them, and I touched on most of them earlier. However, instead of saying 45 your screen for these devices, simply say lock your screen. When students lock their screen, it'll turn black, and that allows them to turn their direct attention to you and not what is on their screen as well. There are also some strategies in classroom technology management that apply to technology in general. Monitor by walking around is the first. This goes along with how your room's set up as well. Walking through the classroom, monitoring what is on your student's screen, enables you to see that they are on what they are supposed to be on and not off task on other websites or games. Policy applies to all forms of technology. It's very important to have policy set so students know direct expectations and have no question about if they're allowed to access certain content or not, or any questions on what they're doing or how to handle the device. Setup can be a range of things: group work, individual settings, how the desks are placed. But the main point for setup is allowing you to be able to monitor all the screens. You need to be able to see what your students are accessing. Time is another one. You can simply set a timer once students begin an activity so they know how long they have to work. Or time can be a time frame for how long you're wanting to work on a certain skill or task using technology throughout the week or class period too. Finally, we will discuss managing one-to-one computing in BYOD classrooms, meaning bring your own device. But first, let's look at one-to-one computing. There are some best practices for this as well in managing it. Define your program goals. This simply means, what do you want to get out of the lesson? What are you wanting your students to learn? Allowing you and your students to know this makes it easier to reach these goals and easier to plan for how to successfully get there. Your devices will play a role, and you need to define these before starting your lessons. One-to-one computing is good, but you can also use one-to-one for other devices. So when selecting your device, know what you want to get out of it, and allow your students to know this too, so they will know what they are using it for and how it's aiding your lesson. Model is one I chose because I think it's important to model how students need to use the technology, how to care for it, and how to access it. Setting applies to all the technology, and I've discussed this a lot, but it really is important for this too. Setting allows it to be more attainable for students, easier for you to monitor them, and easier for group work to go along with the lesson. Filter your information. This is important. I know most school networks have certain websites and searches blocked so students can only access things that are appropriate while on school grounds. That applies, but you can also filter the information by already having predetermined links set for your students to access, and it allows for quicker access as well. Now let's move to BYOD, or Bring Your Own Device Classroom Management. I found this video that pairs well with this topic. Let's view it.
Hi, my name is Laura Wheeler and I teach at Ridgemont High School in the Ottawa-Carleton District School Board in Ottawa, Ontario, Canada. I'm here to deliver a 2-minute PD on BYOD, Bring Your Own Device policies in the classroom, and how teachers can adapt their classroom management strategies to the BYOD classroom. One of the issues that I hear teachers speak to is the idea that not all of their students have a device that they can bring to class. This is absolutely true. There are a couple of workarounds that I found that help a lot. One is to have your students share their devices. So if you have 2 or 3 students working together, they only really need one device for their group in order to look up the material that they need. Another option is that many schools have some devices, some tablets or some Chromebooks in their school that they can loan out to students that don't have their own device or that need a different device for the task at hand. One of the tips that I would advise is that you collect a student card with the student's name or a post-it note with the student's name, and that if ever the device is not returned at the end of the class period, that you now know who was responsible for that device. Also, I've heard teachers are concerned over the students being on their devices all the time. What I found is that you can really set the parameters for when it is and is not appropriate in your own classroom. So you can let the students know that unless you have explicitly given permission for them to be on their devices, that the expectation is that they are not on their devices at all. Otherwise, many classrooms run on an as-needed basis. So if you need to use your device, you are welcome to pull it out. Some teachers will ask that the students ask for their permission each time they would like to look something up. But the idea being that it's not a free-for-all, that it really is up to the teacher to let their students know when it is and is not appropriate to be working with their device. Another problem is that the teachers think the students are on their phone while they're trying to teach, and that does occur. I've seen that in my own classroom. A strategy that I found that works really well when you're trying to do some direct instruction is to ask for screens down. So if a student has a phone or a tablet, you can ask them to put the screen upside down on the table, and that way the device is not distracting them with the messages that are popping up. Any laptop can be closed less than a 45-degree angle, and again, the distractions there are not limited, and I'm able as a student to pay attention to my teacher's instruction. The other thing I ask my students when I'm teaching is to have their earphones out, and many of them will tell me, oh, but miss, they're not on. And I say that's not enough. Having the earphone in your ears is rude and disrespectful, and I don't know if you're playing music or not. So my instructions are always screens down and earphones out.
This has been my presentation on management and technology integration.